Well, hello, good people. Part 5 of the Pietenpol Ford. I'm well aware we haven't had any Ford action for a while, but now I've decided what to do with the engine. I've been spending some money. The engine's going in my cycle car project, but I'm still turning it into an aeroplane engine first, complete with propeller, and it's going to run on a test stand and everything. The reasons for putting it in the cycle car, well, there'll be in a separate film about cycle cars at some point. Anyway, more to the point, I spent some money with O'Neill Ford, and rather fun buying off-the-shelf stuff. Can't really do it for the Aronca or the Vauxhall. So I bought a oil filler tube and breather, and the seal for the rear of the sump, which I need, because the front's going to be cut off and have a different seal on it. I bought 4 spark plugs too. These plugs are quite interesting. Well, I think so anyway. They're auto light plugs. They're not the cheapest, but they're not the most expensive either. Interestingly, these Fords, I think it's all Model A's, B's and early V8s, use this 7/8 by 18 thread. When I was given the engine, it had cardboard glued over each of the plug holes and stopped muck going down the engine, which was a very good idea. And of course, I peeled the cardboard off thinking, oh, it'll take a 18mm plug, having cheerfully dug out a few old 18mm to wind in there. And of course, it's about 1/4 of an inch bigger in diameter. Because the cardboard was stuck on there, of course, it stopped the threads getting dirty as well. So I was able just to whiz a little wire brush around them and then stick an oily rag finger down there and clean the thread up like so. And they've all cleaned up very well and the plugs go straight in. I've only taken one out. I'll put it away again now. Don't want to damage them. But the only thing I haven't been able to buy off the shelf is a head gasket. That's because it's a small bore, not a big bore. The 3.3s are easily available and not expensive, but I've tried a few different suppliers and no one's got a small bore one. So I've ordered a sheet of copper, 1.2mm thick or thereabouts, 500mm by 250. I don't really like working in metric. In imperial for gentlemen out there. This block is 19.5 inches, which is just over 490mm, and it's 8 inches wide. Of course, the 250mm sheet is 10 inches wide or just under. So that'll be a fun episode, making a head gasket, solid copper. It's going to take a little time to do. I'm going to have to cut quite a lot of holes out and things. I'll take it easy. I might use a big bore gasket as a pattern. Anyway, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So today's exercise is sorting out the inlet manifold and exhaust stubs. Somewhat surprisingly, Bernard Pietenpol kept the Ford manifold, which I say surprising because it weighs a ton. This is a right-hand drive one. It's got an extra kind of nobule there. I think it must have been for the distributor, which is up here. So I guess that went to the advance and retard lever on the steering column. Anyway, this has to be cut. I'll stick the drawing up on the screen, but this engine mounted in the car is mounted with the front slightly high, and so this manifold flange is a bit cockeyed. So it needs to be cut off and welded on again so the thing sits flat. The drawing says about 3/16 of an inch, but we'll have a mess around in a moment anyway. Of course, whilst we're messing around with manifolds, we need to mess around with carburettors as well. I don't have the original carb off this engine. It was used on another engine. All the Fords, I believe, had a cast iron Zenith made by Fords. The 2 litre and the 3.3 use the same carburettor, just different jets. However, I was given a Tillotson. This was an aftermarket carburettor for the 3.3. Very nice, but it's suffering the Tillotson problem in that the casting is quite badly distorted. I can actually get my thumbnail. Those screws are done up tight. Yeah, I can get my thumbnail between the casting in certain places. It's also missing a few parts. They are available online, so that's not really a problem. The issue with the Tillotson is trying to sort out the distortion, because whilst the bottom half, if I removed that jet there, could be lapped on a flat surface with some wet and dry paper, the top half is not so easy. That venturi is fixed, as are the pivots for the float there. So it's very difficult to try and flatten it. I did have a bit of a clean up with a file as best I could, very carefully, but it's not very easy. It's missing parts, so I'm not going to bother with it. I've got a better idea. I had a bit of a cast around for 2-litre engines that rev to about 2,200 RPM. Of course, then I thought of the grey Fergie. That's absolutely perfect. It has one of these carburettors. Of course, I had this in a box under the bench anyway. It's a Zenith 24 T2. They're still in production. You can buy new ones, get them reconditioned. There's cheap Chinese knockoffs on Amazon, which I'm told are actually quite good. So I'm going to use one of those. It's a bit smaller in choke diameter than the Tillotson. The Tillotson is 1 inch and 3/16, and this is a whopping 15/16 of an inch. I can't believe I get so excited about small bore carburetors, but there we are. And as if to validate my decision to use a rather small bore carburetor, I'll show you something on this manifold. That hole is 1 inch up through the manifold, so I don't think my 15/16 carburetor bore is particularly small. It's probably about right. Of course, Bernie Pietenpol didn't use the exhaust manifold. He made 4 stub exhausts that sat in here. Now this tube is a little too small, but I'm actually going to use it because I happen to have it. It's slightly thicker in the wall than one would really want on an aeroplane as well, but it's good enough for what I'm doing. The drawings are a bit vague. I'll put the drawing up on the screen, but his appear to have some tabs welded on them. But where the tabs attach to is slightly mysterious. A friend of mine was at the EAA museum at Oshkosh a while back. They have Bernie Pietenpol's original hangar that was moved from Cherry Grove in Minnesota onto the museum site. And in it, of course, is an air camper. This is the motor that's on it. And as you can see, it appears that the block has been tapped and drilled for extra studs to hold the exhaust stubs on. I'm going to do something slightly different. Rather than drilling the block and possibly creating myself more problems, as it's not a flyer, I'm going to use the inlet manifold to hold a couple of plates on with the exhaust stubs brazed or welded to the plates. There's a bit of extra length here in terms of the studs are quite long, and so I've got a piece of flat plate here. It's, I think, 6mm, just under 1/4 of an inch thick, and I'm going to cut and drill so it sits behind the inlet manifold. It'll move the manifold out ever so slightly, but there's plenty of room on the studs for the nuts and washers still. That shouldn't create a problem. Well, that didn't take long. I did a few extra bits. I want another flange for here because the bolt spacing is a little different on the Zenith. So I'm going to chop this around in a moment and replace the flange with that brazed on flat. I was originally going to change this part as well and cut that off and put a new flange on with complete holes for the nuts and bolts, but actually I'm not going to. Bernie Pietenpol didn't, and I quite like this arrangement. It seems to pull up nice and tight. Anyway, once I've titivated these plates a bit more, I want to cut them so they're all nice and round, so a bit of filing going on, and then I'll file the holes out ever so slightly to take this pipe, and then I can braze them in. The inner pipes, you might have noticed on the drawings, have to have a bit of a joggle on them, but I think the first thing is to attack the inlet manifold with a hacksaw. I know a lot of you chaps like hacksaws and Starrat hacksaw blades, as do I. I have the most dreadful confession to make. Well, the saw of Satan made light work of that. It's actually very pleasing. I rather like that. I actually bought it for doing stuff in the garden and other things, but there was no point not buying some metal blades and trying it out. I'm going to clean the manifold up a bit round here now. I might just cut down sort of there and there, and then sort of file it round a bit just to titivate it. And then it can have a new piece welded on. I'll use the same pipe as for the stub exhaust and the new flange. I've cleaned everything up now, so ready to braze this piece of pipe onto the manifold. Brazing is far superior to any form of welding for this application. I brazed up several manifolds before. The Vauxhall exhaust and inlet manifold have both got extensive repairs and replacements. In fact, the Vauxhall inlet manifold is basically new, made out of malleable iron fittings and steel pipe. It's very good. This is the flux I'm using. I got it in Toronto, I think, when I was in Home Depot a while back. Anyway, very good stuff. So I'll strike up the oxyacetylene plant and get brazing. The main thing is to warm the manifold up, because obviously being cast iron, it could crack. Unlikely to, but it could crack, so I'm just going to warm it gently. I've put the workpiece a little away from the jaws of the vise, so there won't be too much heat being gobbled up by the vise. The vise is nice and tight, and I've cleaned the pipe so there's no mill scale on it around the edges there, because with brazing and silver soldering, cleanliness is everything. I'm not going to mix the flux up and make a paste. I merely warm the rod up, dip it in the pot, and then let the flux run down the rod when I start brazing the joint up. The main thing for me is not actually to jog anything, so I'll probably, when I start brazing, I'll start here and put a little bit of brass onto the flat bit of the cast iron there, so it starts running into the joint, because once the joint's got a bit of metal in it, it'll stay put. I'll just turn the gas off. That didn't take long. It seems to have gone quite nicely. The good thing about brazing, unlike welding where you really have to make one good weld, you can't really keep going back over welds. That's a pretty bad thing to do. You can always go and add a little bit more. So I just put a bit more in places where I thought it was a bit thin. The main thing now is to just let it cool down on its own accord. If it was steel and just mild steel, I could quench it and that would get rid of a lot of the flux. But actually this Lincoln flux hasn't made much of a mess, and I can sort of chip it off once it's cooled down. It's hygroscopic actually, this flux, so I'm not going to paint this for a while. If I leave it somewhere damp, in fact I could even chuck it outside for a day or two, because it doesn't matter if you get a little bit of rusting in the pipe or anything, then the flux tends to fall off. It's quite a good trick with flux. If you don't mind letting something get rusty, just go and chuck it in the bushes for a day or two. Don't do what I did yesterday. I put some chicken legs in the stove at 10 o'clock in the morning and remembered at 6 o'clock last night as I was driving to Bodmin Airfield that they were still there. Fortunately, it wasn't turned up very much, but carbonizade. I had to press on without you because the film about the Aronka brochure was uploading off my iPad, so I couldn't film and upload at the same time, and I sort of had to get on and do both. So I've made a flange anyway, so that's ready to go on there. Just going to tap it on there, make sure it's lined up nicely, tap it on there, then we'll braze it on. Just square it up a little bit, otherwise the carburettor will be on at a funny angle. I haven't drilled these holes full size yet. I thought I would just pilot them through and then I can decide how, when I finally get whatever Zenith carburettor I'm going to use, I can drill them out to whatever size, either put studs in or nuts and bolts. I'm not sure which yet. I don't need to decide yet, so I shan't. Bash that down a little bit more. I did machine the end of the pipe. I didn't show that actually, but it went in the lathe and was faced off, as was that end, so it should all be fairly square. But before I finally braze it on, could just try it up to the block and see if it's fairly level, because we know the other one was fairly cockeyed for a reason. I think that looks about right. I'm not going to even bother with the nuts and washers. Let's go and braze that flange on. You might have noticed a little flame out the side of the nozzle earlier on. Wasn't quite like the Space Shuttle Challenger breaking up, but I've had this torch since about 1986 when the Ministry of Defence first lent it to me. Suppose I should get another one at some point. I'm just quite fond of it, but it's all getting a bit knackered. Well, that looks all right. That's how it'll be eventually, with the little Zenith carburettor on it. You might well have noticed I made this pipe a little bit longer. That's the bit I cut off, so it's about 5/8 of an inch longer. I decided that was an easy thing to do. I know I'm still going to joggle these inner pipes, but it means they just need a bit of a right and a left in them. You could get away with straight pipes, but Bernard put a joggle in his, and I rather like the way his pipes look on the air camper, so I'm going to have a bit of a right and a left and a right, and tidy these up. But I'm going to stop there for today. Several reasons. I'm in the simulator on Sunday night for my 6 monthly check. Got to go and have a quick read of the book, I suppose. I know the only no-go item on the minimum equipment list for an Englishman is the kettle, but I suppose I should dig a bit deeper than that. I've also got to tidy the house up because the family have all been away skiing for the week and it looks like it's been burgled. Normal sort of bachelorly stuff, I suppose. Anyway, so we'll carry on soon. I'm actually going to carry on when I've got some free time, sorting these out, and I'll film as I go, and also starting making the bits for the oil system, of which I've got all the materials here. So I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.